let's talk about these new Tilbury Beautifying Eye Trends palettes. These are the two I picked up. There are 6 total, and it was really hard to narrow down. I do really like the look of a lot of the other ones, but I felt like these really spoke to me the most. So these are $60 each, and I bought them off the brand's website. They came really quickly, and I believe I got 15% off coupon with these. My only other previous experience with Tilbury eyeshadows is the Beautyverse palette that I bought 2 years ago, and this one is also plastic packaging, but as you can see, the cover is really beautiful. This was a holiday limited edition release, and I do want to mention that the pan size and the entire palette size are different, but they do have the same amount of product, so they are both said to have 9 grams of product. I do think that the clear cover does make these look a bit cheap. The way this is, it feels very drugstore, and for these to only be $15 less, it doesn't feel very luxury the way that Tilbury does like to portray themselves, as well as just the other types of packaging they have. It does feel very luxurious. This one, if you put a different logo on this and you told me this was a Milani palette, I would believe you, with the exception of the shimmer shadows in here, because these are definitely beautiful, and we're gonna get into that. I will be showing you a couple of comparisons between this palette, the Beautyverse palette, as well as the Makeup by Mario Ethereal Eyes palette, and a couple of other eyeshadows and a highlighter. So first, I'm gonna be showing you detailed swatches of all the shimmer shadows, and I have to say, the way these looked in certain photos and certain videos, I could just tell some of these shimmers are just going to be very PC and very sparkly and very twinkly, which is why I was very intrigued to try these. I was very pleased with the shimmers in the Beautyverse palette. I do really like that they're mostly topper-like shadows. Now, in terms of the mattes, I do think that the mattes are a little bit different between this and this palette. And of course, I haven't tried any of the other previous Tilbury palettes, so I don't know if these mattes are pretty much the mattes from their other palettes. So none of these mattes are the Future Matte formula, which is basically like a cream to powder like Natasha Denona has, and the mattes are actually labeled on the back and it says matte silk, so they are definitely different. They definitely feel silky. They don't have a lot of kick up, but we'll get into that. So first, let's get into some detailed swatches, some comparisons, and then I'll show you how I created these 2 looks, one with each palette, and then at the end of the video I'll give you some of my thoughts. First up are the shimmers from the Super Neutral palette, and these are all very twinkly. This one definitely looks like it's going to be the most opaque. And this first shade looks just like the Fenty Diamond Bomb. Yep, definitely the most opaque and also less twinkly. And then this one's super sparkly and has a light brown base with silver and pink sparkles throughout it. The pink sparkles are pretty sparse. They're not very noticeable. Next, these are 4 shimmers from the Emerald Effect palette, and these are the most sparkly. There are 3 other shimmers in here, but they're a little bit more on the satin side, so I thought I would swatch those together. This is a very light gold with silver flecks throughout it, topper shade. This is a beautiful olivey green, a little bit more opaque. And then this is like a forest green. It has a little bit of, it's a little bit sheer and has a gold flecks throughout it. And then the last sparkly shade is like an icy blue with gold flecks throughout it. I feel like it doesn't read as icy blue as in the pan once it's swatched out. I just looked on the back. It does have the matte formula description on the back. So these 2 are molten satins, and this is a crystal chrome. And this shade looks the most smooth and shiny. These are not the PC texture from some of the other shades. And these are quite all opaque. Really beautiful. This one is so stunning. It's got a little bit of dimensionality. It's like an aged gold with a little bit of a darker tone, depending on the way the light hits it. For textural reference, this is the shade Golden Galaxy Crystal Glow from the Beautyverse palette, and this is a Crystal Chrome from Supernatural palette. I would say that these have very similar textures, even though they have different names. So I'm just gonna swatch one here and then the other one here. Obviously the shades are not the same. Here's Digital Lilac, which is a Crystal Glow, and it's from the Beautyverse palette. And here's Diamond Dimension, and this is from the Super Neutral palette. And these have identical texture, I would say. For sure, more topper-like. Super sparkly. Even in the pan, they look like they're the same kind of texture, especially these two. These 2 obviously have different level of opacity, but they do seem like they're the same kind of formulation and pigment. Next up for comparison is Diamond Dimension from the Super Neutral palette. This is the Diamond Bomb and How Many Carats from Fenty Beauty. And this is the top shade from We Need Better Lighting from Patrick Ta. Definitely some similarities texture-wise. I do think that the Diamond Bomb feels the most similar. You can feel a little bit more of a dry texture with We Need Better Lighting. But I think they're going to have almost the same type of twinkliness. They're going to be really sparkly. Very slight differences between the three. I think the particle size in the Charlotte Tilbury is a little bit larger than both of these. And the Diamond Bomb is for sure sheer. I'm going to try to build it up a little bit. It's also really silky smooth. But I think once it's built up, it's so similar. But again, the particle size is just a little bit different. The other texture the first shade in both the palettes reminded me of was the Too Faced Disco Crush Single Shadows. I have a dedicated video on these, and I think that the texture is identical. I'm really curious to see these swatched out because they seem like they're pretty much the same. So here's Charlotte Tilbury, here is Too Faced Fairy Dust, here is Charlotte Tilbury, and Hypnotic from Too Faced. Just gonna swatch them next to each other. I mean, they feel the same, and I feel like they look the same too. When I look up close to them, they look identical. The texture, the texture of them, the mica particle size in them, the sparkle level, and even the shades themselves look basically the same. There's a little bit of silver flecks throughout these two shades, but I think these are the same, and they're both made in Italy. I think the texture of the Charlotte Tilbury shades, the really topper special shades in the palettes, are very similar to the shimmers from the Makeup by Mario Ethereal palettes. So here's the newest one. Maybe some similar shades across these, and I will swatch those out. Here's the Diamond Dimension from Charlotte Tilbury. And here's the second shade in the top row from the Moonlight Ethereal Eyes palette. So there is a slight difference. You can kind of see it. I think you can tell that the Charlotte Tilbury looks even more sparkly, and the particle size does look just a bit larger. So here is the Charlotte Tilbury, and here is Moonlight. They do feel also a little bit different, and the Ethereal Eyes shade is kind of like a blue-purple duochrome, so they don't exactly match shade-wise. Here's the first shade from the Emerald Effect palette from Charlotte Tilbury, and here's a shimmer from the Moonlight palette in the middle row. Obviously, shade-wise, they're not the same, but I do feel like they're a bit similar. They do feel like when they're actually being swatched out, they do feel it's just slightly different. Ethereal Eyes, second shade in the center row, and a shade from Super Neutral from Charlotte Tilbury. Texture-wise, these look almost identical. Color-wise, they're not, but I feel like these are very similar. The Charlotte Tilbury, it has a little less of a drier texture when I'm swiping it compared to the Ethereal Eyes shade, but the level of sparkle is pretty much on par. If you told me these two are from the same brand, I would believe you. So for the first look, I'm using this palette, and I'm gonna go in with this shade and this shade and this shade. So I'm just gonna say the numbers because they're just numbered, they're not named. So I'm starting off with shade number 3. And I'm going in with a lighter hand and just building it up because it is quite pigmented, especially on a primer like this where it has a little bit of tackiness to it. I really love the tone of this one. And then I'm gonna take shade number 6, which is the darkest shade in the palette. It's not really a black, it's more of like a charcoal black. So it's not like fully, it's pretty opaque, but it doesn't seem like it fully is. And then I'm gonna take the gray, or shade number 7, and I'm just gonna take that on the edges and just blend this out. I want this to be quite a smoky eye, for sure. And then I'm just gonna take it a little bit underneath my lower lash line. I haven't done my concealer yet though. And then I'm just gonna go in with the first shade and just deepen it up here and blend it in more. Taking the Stick and Sparkle Primer from Dieverune Cosmetics. I'm just going to be putting on a little bit. So I'm just going to put it a little bit on my pinky. And I feel like that's actually even too much. Just the thinnest coat. Just tapping it on a little bit, and then I'm going to wait, and I'm just going to kind of tap it on even further. And I'm going to take the 9th shade, and I'm going to tap it in kind of the center towards the outer corner. That is so pretty. And then I'm going to take the first shade, and I'm just going to swipe that up on the inner corner up into my crease. This is such a beautiful topper. Okay, I love that. And here's the finished look. Onto the second look with this palette. I think I'm just gonna go in with these 2 shades in the crease. And then I really wanna use one of the satin shades and definitely one of the sparkle toppers. And on this eye, I primed with the Pat McGrath eyeshadow primer. Just wanted to see how these mattes work on slightly different primers. So I'm going in with the 2nd shade in the center top, and that is quite pigmented. I do wish there was maybe one more matte in here versus a satin. I just feel like, I don't know, with a shade that's a little bit more colorful, so to speak, with the greens, I would kind of think that they would want to add another shade in here. And then I'm taking the dark brown, but I'm going to try to keep it only just a little bit above my crease, but making sure I have room to blend it up. I'm going to go back in with the other brush. And I'm going to actually go in with the other shade a little bit more. I do feel like it's kind of like sticking down a little bit on this primer, but I was able to get quite a bit of depth from just kind of going in and slowly building it up versus going in. You could definitely go in and have the full opacity right away. I really am liking these mattes. Picked up shade number 3. And I misted my brush, so it would hopefully apply pretty nicely. I'm gonna kind of leave it on this outer corner, on this inner corner, kind of blank. But I'm just kind of mimicking the wing that I did with the matte. Stick and Sparkle again. I'm just gonna pop that a little bit over the satin as well. I really need that grip on the more sparkly shades because otherwise it's just going to fall off my eyes. So I'm gonna take the center bottom shade. It's that sparkly dark green, foresty green. I'm just gonna put that in the center, kind of pretty lightly. And then I'm taking the shade next to that, the kind of aqua, and I'm gonna put that on the inner corner. This one's very, very sheer. So I did my concealer, and I'm just going to finish off this lash line, connecting the lower lash line with the satin shade. And then I'm just going to take this blending brush, there's no extra product on it, and I'm just kind of blending the edges a little bit further. And that really kind of smoked itself out. I'm starting to see just a little bit of fallout here, and I think it's from the very topper-like shade that I put in the inner corner. I think I should have put a little bit more of the glitter glue down for that. And here's the finished look. This is a first impression. I've only used each of the palettes one time, and I'm not really familiar with Charlotte Tilbury in a way where I feel like I know the brand and I know their textures, I know their formulation, etc. So I will keep you updated on my thoughts on these. Overall, I'm really happy with these. I think the mattes are really nice and pigmented. It actually kind of shocked me a little bit, and I really like the different levels of depths in this one. I think this one is my favorite one, not only the tones, but I do love that this one, the 3 shimmers that are in here, they're all special. So I really feel like the balance of the mattes to the shimmers is the best in this palette, and I just gravitate towards these tones. Though I do feel like the mattes perform a little bit differently on different eyeshadow primers, so I do want to definitely test that out some more. Now, even though the mattes are very pigmented, you can definitely definitely go in with just a really light hand and pick up less products. You can build it up if you wanted to. As much as I really enjoy the cream to powder mattes in the Beautyverse palette, I was not a fan of this pink shade, even though it is said that it is still a future matte, but it's not, because it feels like a regular dry pressed shadow. It's definitely not a cream to powder, and I did not like it. So I'm happy that the formula of that matte pink shadow is not the same as this one. This one is way, way better. So I am enjoying this palette so far, but I just think that the packaging is such a disappointment. Personally, I think this should have been like $55 at most, or $50 because of the packaging. And I did actually notice that mine already cracked right here where you open it, which is really unfortunate because I literally just got this palette in yesterday. I haven't dropped it or anything like that. Also, the way it came packaged was not the greatest. There was no bubble wrap whatsoever. There was a couple of tissue paper, and I just felt like that was not enough for something that is $60. So $120, and you're shipping it and just like floating around in a cardboard box with some tissue paper. They were moving around for sure, so I'm really glad that none of the shades actually came broken. Now let's talk about the green palette, the Emerald Effect. Same thing with this one. I do wish there was more mattes in this one. I just feel like there's a little bit too many shimmers for this palette. It's like either you're an all shimmer palette or you're not. I think this palette is missing a deepening up shade, so I do like this one a little less, but I do think that the shimmers in here are beautiful. And as someone who's not the biggest fan of satins, these are nice satins. They have a beautiful elevated sheen on them, which is what I really like. I think if there was at least one more matte, I would have liked this palette a little bit more. Let me know in the comments below if you picked any of these up and what you think of them. I really hope this video was helpful in providing you with some information, whether you think this would be something that you would find as worth the money or not. If so, what's worth it for some people might not be worth it for other people. And of course, you want to make sure that what you're bringing into your collection is something that you find yourself using a lot. I would be interested in trying out some of the other palettes in the future, but definitely on sale. I do believe there's a Sephora sale coming up. I think it's usually in April. So I would just hold off and think about if you want to add this to your collection. Watch a bunch of videos, as many as you can. It's always very helpful to see everyone's different opinions and swatches, etc. If you enjoy this kind of content, I have a lot of videos up on my channel swatching beautiful, shifty, sparkly, shimmery shadows. Some of them will be up on the screen for you. So thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time.